Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for another episode of Regulatory Voices. Today I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Robert Califf. Dr. Califf is one of the most influential figures in modern clinical research, regulatory science and public health. He served twice as FDA Commissioner from 2016 to 2017 and then again from 2022 to 2025. Before that, he spent much of his career at Duke University, where he was Professor of Medicine, Vice Chancellor for Clinical and Translational Research, Director of Translational Medicine Institute, and the founding director of the Duke Clinical Research Institute. Across his career, he's been internationally recognised for his work in cardiovascular medicine, clinical trials, health outcomes research, healthcare quality, and evidence generation. The reason I was particularly keen to have Dr. Califf on the show is because this conversation sits at the heart of many concerns and questions being discussed across the regulatory community today. And we're going to explore how the FDA functions as an institution, the importance of experienced scientific leadership and institutional memory, the pressures the FDA is facing, and the challenge of misinformation and maintaining public trust. So, Dr. Califf, thank you very much for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
Perfect. So we'll jump straight into the first question. You've described the FDA as one of the few institutions where scientific expertise, public health, law, politics, and industry all intersect simultaneously. What makes leading an organization like that uniquely difficult?
Well, first of all, I think it's a real privilege to be in the leadership position at a place like FDA. It has so much influence over the day-to-day lives of people. And that's what I think makes it challenging also. In academia, there's a lot of theory. In the practice of medicine, you do make a lot of decisions, particularly in my specialty of cardiology, that have serious implications for individuals. But at the FDA, decisions that are made can affect the entire country. So there's a lot at stake, and that leads to a lot of interest and a lot of pressure. So, at least given the way the FDA has normally functioned, from my perspective, the most important part of the job is maintaining equilibrium across all the interests that are involved and clearing the way for civil servants to do their jobs without interference or undue influence by money and politics. And then at the same time, as a political appointee, you are in the world of politics and money as part of your job. So as a cardiologist, I've thought about, the ideal role of FDA commissioner, sort of like the AV node in the heart. You have a lot of impulses generated up in the atria, but only the AV node governs what gets through to the functioning main muscle of the heart. And I think that's sort of the way the FDA commissioner should function, but it has its stresses and people go after you every day.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most unique agencies out there compared to how the other ones are set up abroad, like MHRA and EMA. And as you said, with the political nature of it and kind of how things are now, and it's a unique challenge and a unique institution. And my follow-up question to that would be, how much of the FDA's effectiveness depends on its institutional culture rather than just formal processes?
I think they're both essential. Without standard operating approaches that are codified, it's very hard to know how to navigate such complex thing as developing and producing medical products or growing and selling food to the world. These are really complicated endeavors. So you need a way of approaching it that people can understand and depend upon. But also because every situation is a bit different. So you have a way of doing things, but the specifics are different. You need a culture which is operating well at this interface that you described in your introduction. you have people that aren't used necessarily to working together with a common mission inside the FDA. But I'd say over time, the culture has really fostered pretty deep understanding between, let's say, scientists, clinicians, public health people, lawyers. As a cardiologist in practice, when I talk to lawyers, it was usually not a good thing. But there are a lot of lawyers at FDA who are outstanding people who understand public health and
Mm.
are really working to pave the way for better outcomes in the public.
Some of the top leaders in sponsors these days are have legal backgrounds or have worked as regulatory counsels at the FDA and have progressed to VP head of regulatory. It's a more common route we're seeing now, and it's probably a little bit of what you said there, the intersection of it. Was there anything about FDA culture that impressed you more than you expected once you became the commissioner?
Well, it's important just to keep in mind that I initially went to FDA as a civil servant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, usually a commissioner comes from outside, having been appointed through a political process. But what happened with me is I went up as a deputy commissioner for medical products and tobacco and spent a year as a civil servant. So I was sort of, by the time I became commissioner, I was sort of ingrained into the culture. And, I would say far and away, it wasn't a surprise, but the intensity of it is hard to appreciate until you're there. The public health mission is an enormous driving force. You feel it every day when you work at FDA, and it's front of mind for everyone who works there. Now, of course, like any large organization, the second time around, I think we peaked out at about 18,000 employees. So like any large organization, you got to have some people who aren't with the mission or go astray or have personal
Mm-hmm.
problems. But, I can, as far as I know, I've worked in every sector of biomedicine and healthcare now. I've been a clinician, I've been a health system leader, I've been an academic leader, a researcher. I've worked in tech, biotech, and the device industry and pharma. And I even, while I worked at Alphabet, helped start an insurance company. So, I can't say that I've come across a more dedicated workforce than the people who work at FDA. It's just very driven by the mission.
Well, public service is a calling. It's not for everybody. It takes a certain type of person with a certain belief system, and it's not. They could easily go into other areas and get better compensated, but there's a mission behind them, and I think that's a really unique thing and something that I've learned a lot from speaking to people who have left the FDA via their own decision or not their decision, and about how much that mission meant to them. So it definitely comes across with every person you speak to.
Yeah, the last couple of days I've been thinking about this because I went to the DIA meeting.
Mm,
And I'm a fellow at the DIA, but most years I haven't gone to the meeting because I've had other conflicts. But at this meeting, I bet I ran into 100 people who either are still working at FDA or worked at FDA, but were doged
mhm.
or left because of what they thought was a toxic environment. And I'd say the majority would go back
Yeah.
if the situation was right, because while the mission in, let's say, industry or academia is a great mission, it's not the same.
Mm.
And it was really sort of palpable how people felt a bit a loss and not getting up every morning thinking about that mission.
Mm. You've spoken about the importance of consistency in regulatory systems. And as a two-term commissioner, how difficult is it to maintain consistency across different review divisions, leaders, and administrations?
Well, so there you said a mouthful there in that sentence. So I'll try to reflect it apart a little bit. I the FDA function is codified into law in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. And then there are rules and guidances that sort of lay out what the rules of the game are. The FDA doesn't make the rules. The rules are made by either Congress or the executive branch when a federal rule is put into effect. But like a referee, the FDA interprets the rules and applies those rules to practice. And so the way that's done, I think, needs to be consistent. But it's also important to remember that the law is different for different commodities.
Hmm.
So I suspect that your audience is mostly drug and device
Yeah.
people, but food is a very large part of the FDA. And tobacco regulations are also different, as are cosmetic regulations. So, but the general method of evaluating risk and benefit um, and using evidence to drive policy, that needs to be consistent. And then within an area, I do think there's tremendous importance to being consistent in the way you do things and the way you approach problems. Even within drugs and devices for different diseases,
Hmm.
there are really big differences. For example, rare diseases with accelerated approvals, those are very different ways to approach clinical development than common diseases where there are already effective
Hmm.
treatments. And the specifics of what the endpoints are and all that can be obviously quite different. I think what we really want to avoid is arbitrary changes in the middle of development programs. But even having said that, the science does change. So, given that a development program takes a decade or more from the time you're developing the preclinical evidence, um, there will be times when, let's say, a competing product comes on the market that changes the whole field. And now the goalpost actually does need to move.
Hmm.
But what we don't want to do is to move the goalpost for arbitrary
Of
reasons that
course.
are not justified. And I got to say, I'm scratching my head right now over, I won't go into all the details, but there's a memo a couple of weeks ago from Mike Davis, who's the acting head of CEDAR, about the fact that he reversed the decision by his predecessor, um, basically because his predecessor had overruled the staff twice, but left no documentation of why she did it.
Right.
And I think that's what we want to avoid. It made it easy
Yeah, of
for him to
course.
overturn it because there's no argument to be had.
Hmm.
But if you're gonna if you're gonna change what's being done, and you're a regulator, you really need to have an administrative record that
Hmm.
puts the argument forward for public discussion.
There's been a significant amount of discussion, discourse around the departure of some highly experienced FDA leaders and reviewers over the recent years. Peter Marks, Janet Woodcock, Patricia Cavazzoni, and most recently Richard Pazdur, to name but a few. From your perspective, how serious is the loss of institutional knowledge currently facing the agency?
Well, as you might imagine, I think it's really serious. I had, met almost all of those people my first term. And then I came back for the second term in the middle of the Omicron wave, and it was very
Hmm.
reassuring to have highly competent and
Of course.
experienced people on board because the agency at that point was having to do all the work related to COVID and all of its normal work. It was really quite a stress. Um, and of course, that they're only like a small fraction of the experienced people that have left. Um, and many of the people below them were doged, as the station,
Yeah,
as
yeah.
the statement goes. Which, my interpretation of that is you had a bunch of young people who knew nothing about what they were doing, who came in and just arbitrarily fired people for no reason other than sometimes their job description included a word
Hmm.
that um, it, it's just horrible. Um, And so, does that affect, um, drugs or devices that have already gotten to the end of the road and the final decision needs to be made? I would say only in the cases like the one I mentioned where, for whatever reason, political or ideologic, one of the new leaders with no experience really,
Mhm.
just sort of arbitrarily changes course. But for the most part, not a big effect on that part. What people underestimate is that the vast majority of work at the FDA is dealing with the 90+% of products that never make it to market
Of course.
because they enter human studies in a development program where almost 100% of the time, the first time you do something to a human being with a new product, things you didn't expect happen.
Of course.
And it's that knowledge and wisdom of having seen a lot across multiple products and product types
Mhm.
that's so valuable to help steer industry towards development decisions that lead to the best outcome.
Mm.
And so, we'll only know the full effects of this a decade from now. And I hope that we're already beginning to see a stabilization and a
Mm.
reversal of some of these effects. But
Mm.
the FDA lost a bunch of national treasures and the people that you mentioned.
And I've listened to a few of your discussions and some of your Substack writings, and you've spoken a fair amount about the importance of career expertise inside the FDA. And you've mentioned a little bit there, but what is it that experienced reviewers carry that simply cannot be replaced through guidance documents, training programs, or AI?
Well, um, I think the most important thing is that experience of having seen what happens when you make a decision, the sense of what the next step needs to be,
Hmm.
um, deciphering what's going on the other side of the fence. I wish all companies were fully transparent and above board, but they're not. And so there is a bit of a regulatory game that goes on where
Hmm.
people may not be revealing what would really help make the best decisions, often for um, complex reasons that have to do with personalities within companies or companies dependent on investors and how those relationships work. So, uh, and you mentioned AI. I think much like clinical medicine, um, I think AI will really be able to help sort of fill in things, and so the interaction between the knowledge base that will come through effective use of AI and the human judgment that's needed,
Hmm.
that's going to be a really fascinating area to watch. But at least as of right now, AI is not there yet. It's changing quickly. It's getting there. But at least for now, it's really that human judgment part, which you can't make up. You have to,
Hmm.
like all things in life, you have to have some errors and failures. And um, it is also a hierarchical system. So you mentioned those leaders at the top, the Richard Pastors of the world, much like I don't know, this may not resonate with people who haven't been a doctor, but when you're, an intern, you hope there's a senior resident and an attending physician who's watching over you and giving you
Hmm.
the leeway to make decisions, but knowing when to step in when the right decisions are not being made. And
Hmm.
that's a big part of the way the FDA functions.
Hmm. It's given the platform for the newer people to, you know, make an action and try something, but have the safety net of someone can come in and just makes okay, no, kind of more like this and more like this style. Those are sorts of things that come to mind. And as you say, so many people did just get a reduction in workforce because something was in their job description, and that's the bit that I got the most concern with is those are the people who actually make the machine move every day, the ones who train the people coming in and making the
Yeah.
new reviewers, and that's the bit that I think that's really hard to replace.
Well,
And
critical, and we talk about reviewers, but it's really the whole review team, which
mhm,
include pharmacokinetic modelers
yeah,
and
yeah,
people who know about manufacturing and all those components that have to fit together. And we shouldn't forget the inspector,
mhm,
the investigators at FDA. I mean, it's a big deal to walk into a sophisticated manufacturing plant and try to figure out what the
mm,
heck is going on. And so the learning over time and the supervision of new people is so important there.
mm. And following on from that, you obviously mentioned a few other titles there and responsibilities. Many people across the industry right now have raised concerns about the staffing pressures that is facing the FDA, the increased workload, and the restructuring and the changes that happen more, quicker and quicker. A most recent example being the FDA receiving data directly from clinical trial sites. What concerns you the most about the long-term operational capability of the agency should it stay at the current size it is after all those reductions?
Well, it already has been the case. The FDA hasn't been able to do everything society expects of it.
Hmm.
One of the challenges of being commissioner is that you're looking out over the entire agency. Yeah, you have a certain number of lawyers, you have a certain number of investigators who can do inspections, and you have an overwhelming number of issues that need to be dealt with. I mean, the part of the FDA that's been most effectively staffed has been the medical product side because of the user
Hmm.
fees. And that more runs like a business. I mean, it's time tracking goes on, the time and effort taken to accomplish a job in pre-market discussions and evaluation is handled through metrics. So that's been a lot better, but now that's jeopardized also because the workforce is down. And while AI can help, it can't make up for the human effort that's needed. Yeah, I still, one of the things that was most, I guess this was a surprise. You asked about surprises. I helped with two sets of user fees, and
Hmm.
both times the more mature parts of the industries, remember there are multiple user fees, but the drug and
Yeah.
device um, user fees and the generic user fees, the biggest issue the industry wanted was more meetings. It wasn't faster timelines. Of course, everybody wants faster timelines if you can get them, but they, experienced people recognize that the time from an application to decision by FDA is a tiny fraction of the time it takes to go through the full development
Of course.
program, and they want a lot of meetings, and there are a limited number of people. Those meetings, maybe we'll have meetings of industry AI agents with FDA AI agents,
Mm.
but we're not there now, and I actually don't think that's going to cut the mustard either.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too promising, exciting. um, did serving as the FDA commissioner change the way you thought about leadership itself? And was there a moment during your time there where the weight of the role kind of hit you?
Well, what I'd say is by the time I became commissioner, I was so old, probably not very mutable in terms of my general attitude and views about leadership. And, people have different styles, but mine is to support the people around me, always assuming that the people around me are smarter than I am, particularly about the topic that they're discussing.
Hmm.
But as a leader, and I've led, different organizations, as a leader, you have a view of all the components that the experts in an area may not see how what they're doing affects or is affected by these other areas.
Hmm.
So, but I guess, what couple of things are just stand out is having an impact on how you think about the whole thing. Jobs like this in public service are accompanied by physical threats against you and your family.
Yeah.
That brings it home that you're having an impact on people, and
Mhm.
sometimes in ways that they don't appreciate. Um, and then you have to put up with politicians, and that's um, I was up. I had a fun day yesterday up at a place in rural America, which is trying to develop new approaches to congenital heart disease.
Mhm.
Um, our daughter has congenital heart disease. She's 48 years old now, and
Mhm.
had a great outcome from a huge operation when she was an infant.
Mm.
And I was an intern, so that's part of what I'm working on in older age. But you know, we were talking about the impact of politicians on all this. And, I think the point is you may think you're a great leader when you're on the FDA, but to most of the politicians, you're just a representative object of an institution.
Sure.
And so you'll get attacked by people who will say, oh, it's nothing personal when you're assigned, but they're
Mhm.
attacking you on national television
Yeah.
or putting out press releases about you.
Feels personal.
Um, so, yeah, and you have to have, you know, um, your inner compass has to be strong
Mhm.
to not take the bait to do stupid things when you're in that
Mm.
situation. So those are the kind of things that I factor.
It kind of neatly goes into where I want to take the next part of this conversation, which is public trust and polarization and the modern information environment, especially misinformation, which is something I know you're very passionate about talking about. It does feel like that all these institutions are increasingly operating in environments that are very much shaped by politics, short-term media cycles, social media, and also rapidly changing public expectations. And with that, public trust in these institutions is getting increasingly fragile. How concerned are you about the long term implications of that trend for the FDA and public health more broadly?
I'm very concerned about where all this is headed, and I see health and healthcare as one of the biggest topic areas in the what you might call the information or the misinformation ecosystem.
Yeah.
Um, and I think within that, the FDA is in a central role. Central role. Um, and what I'd say is, in general, we're going through this amazing change in the way we interact with
Yeah.
information in the world. It starts with the internet and then goes to social media. And now it's evolving into the AI driven internet and social media.
Hmm.
And we don't know what to do with it because we've gone from, not that long ago, living in a small personal ecosystem with people that we know
Hmm.
and maybe looking at a national news program that everybody looked at the same thing, reading newspapers and magazines. Now we have 24 by 7 assault on our senses by
Yeah.
the internet. And it's, for someone like me, it's amazing because I love to sop up information and I can do that. But it also, if you look at all the information on the internet, there's only a small part of it which is actual fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Majority of it is either somebody's opinion or frank misinformation. And, um, health is one of the most important areas there because most of what affects how long we live and how functional we are is not what doctors do, it's what we do in everyday
Hmm.
life. It's whether we eat well and exercise and don't use addictive substances. And then the things that doctors do, the most important parts are actually now pretty much in the generic world, controlling blood
Hmm.
pressure and cholesterol, um, mental health interactions. And soon even obesity and diabetes are going to be genericized
Hmm.
and available at a very low cost. But we're assaulted by people selling other things that aren't effective
Yeah.
or may even be harmful. um, on the internet. So it's a really serious situation, and I think it's a significant part of why the U.S. has experienced a stagnation in life expectancy,
Mm,
because we are, um, as Americans, we're the main targets of
mm.
people purveying misinformation, often trying to sell us things on the internet.
As you were speaking, a few sayings come to mind, especially about information. It's something I've heard a few people say about we have an increasing access to information, but we've decreased our ability of understanding. And I think, given that he said that sort of the senses, social media, the 7 second cycles of information that affects people's views on things, and especially with AI, it's something that I've joked about with a few people. If you don't know what you're talking about and you use AI and it gives you an output, you think AI is a genius. Whereas if you know what you're talking about and it gives you an output, you go, well, actually, that's just full of mistakes. That's not right. But there's nothing to control those two. So when you have this misinformation cycle and that view on AI, the two then lead to, as you say, that constant misinformation and people trusting people. Because at the end of the day, people do trust people. It's one of our core instincts as humans. And so I think that does get taken advantage of, especially in today's age and these news cycles.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I think I I agree with that. And I mean, one of the things about trusting people, it's really fascinating, and things I'm working on now. And what leads to trust on the internet and what leads to trust when you're actually humanly interacting are not the same.
mm,
And that is something we're going to have to come to grips with and figure out. But I think the other side of the coin is, if you look at the traditional biomedical enterprise and healthcare delivery
mhm,
systems, and I think US and UK are going through some similar things now,
yeah,
having started in very different places, where I would argue that UK system was far superior going way back, because it emphasized the most important things, having a primary care
yeah,
clinician and basic healthcare. But we have, for the most part, spent more and more money on highly technical things of marginal benefit, and we're very hard to get a hold of. In neither country can you get an appointment these days,
mm,
and people are really pissed off about it.
mm,
So if you want to set up a situation where people are attracted to alternative facts, even if they're incorrect, create a situation where, to get the facts, you have to make an appointment and see
mm,
somebody in a clinic, and then tell them they can't have an appointment for 3 months or six
yeah,
months. Um, they're going to look elsewhere. And so, the way I've been saying it lately is, there's a battle going on for people's minds about health.
yeah,
And while I don't think we can really separate politics and health right now, the way things have evolved, if we just act like we just focused on health, um, the people with the most knowledge are not even on the battlefield.
yeah,
Um, because we've been taught, if we get an MD or a PhD or a public health degree, we've been taught to be reserved and precise. Um, and most institutions tell their people not to be on social media,
yeah,
but that's where the battle is occurring
mm,
now. You know, it's the issue is not what you have serious cancer or what kind of chemotherapy do you get. That's a medical issue, and
yeah,
most people accept it. But we have an onslaught right now of social media saying, for people who have an initial diagnosis of cancer, don't go to an
yeah,
oncologist. Take this dietary supplement, or
yeah.
um,
Only eat fruit.
ivermectin, or whatever it may be. And that's really those things are dangerous to people.
Mm. Why do you think scientific and regulatory institutions have become such focal points for public frustration and this politicization? Is it because health is such a personal thing? Is that the genesis of it?
Well, I think from the U.S. perspective, there's always been a thread of rugged individualism in the U.S. and suspicion of authority.
Right.
By the way, it started with you guys when we kicked
Yeah.
you out of the United, and that's been in the culture. But the internet now made it possible for that to go viral. Um, and there's a very interesting book by Yuval Harari on the evolution of information ecosystems, and the point he makes is that the printing press is a prime example. When there's a sudden access to information, the bad guys win for a long
Mm,
period of time because if you want to make up a lie, you can just do that.
mhm,
If you want to tell the truth, you have obligations to be sure you're right. And it's not just that people have a hard time getting appointments. We've also, I think, unfortunately, and this was the pandemic made everything worse because it, just like the 1918 pandemic, it just brought out all the fears and suspicions. But the response that we had from the public health was to make pronouncements based on our best judgment. And
mhm,
let me be clear, all of the BS about, you know, conspiracies to lie to people, those are just wrong.
mhm,
But what did happen was once a consensus was reached, even if there was great uncertainty, the view was you should tell people the consensus, but not have a detailed discussion of the uncertainty. And I think we've learned now we have to build uncertainty into the public discussion so
mm,
that people are not surprised when more research is done and we get a better answer than what we had.
mm,
In the case of viruses, the virus changes, and now you go from one set of operating characteristics of vaccines to another. Um, but that's true of so many things in medicine. We learn as we go along.
mm. Would you say that nuance is becoming harder to sustain in these public health conversations? And are we
Well,
losing the ability to have evidence based discussions in public?
now, I could be wrong about this, but my theory is that a lot of the genesis of the problems that we have now are because, for the most part, there were experts, intelligentsia, if you will, who were in academia or government who communicated with each other by, in the way it used to be. And most of the public had no way of actually keeping up with all this. And we didn't know who most of the people in the public were.
Mm,
Even if you look at, I still remember when I was an intern and resident in 1978, um, we just took care of the people who showed up.
yeah.
We didn't know who all the people were who were out there and what their problems were. Let me tell you, having worked at Google for 5 years, we know who all 8 billion people on the face of the earth are
Yeah.
and a lot about them. Now we're not only are we accountable on our side as we should be, and we're not prepared for how to handle that. That's
Mm,
I think that's at the core of what's happening in the UK, for example, where
mm,
um, the UK NHS could take care of things in the old system. Now everybody expects to be taken care of, and we feel accountable as we should, but we
mm,
don't have a system that's geared to that. And in the same way, the information access now, people just have no reason or way to know about some of these things. Now are assaulted with all sorts of viewpoints, correct and
yeah.
incorrect, about every
Yeah.
bit of information. So I just think we're going to have a human adaptation to this new environment. And just as we're trying to adapt to just social media, we have AI, which is going to even accelerate it more.
Yeah. How much damage can misinformation actually do to public health over time?
It's profound, in my view, um, because public health is a sum of a lot of little decisions that we make every day that are affected. I was just astounded looking at the outbreak of influenza in the
Yep.
American troops at Fort Benning. I mean, even George Washington realized that he required that the troops get vaccinated because if you want your troops to be ready when the call comes, it's not good to have them sick.
Yeah.
uh, but here you have all this misinformation about vaccinations and an administration which is supporting the skepticism, and you end up with hundreds of soldiers who basically you wouldn't want to deploy because they're sick. So, but you could say the same for controlling your cholesterol, your blood pressure, what you eat. No, I don't really think eating beef tallow is really the recommendation that um, should be there. Now people are selling um, peptide injections from China with no knowledge of what the clinical effects really are.
Mm.
Um, so, and tobacco advertising is a huge impact on the world.
Mm.
So I think it's profound. Um, and again, it's not about details of medical facts. It's about the habits of everyday life that lead to longer and healthier life.
Can public trust, once it's been significantly eroded, realistically be rebuilt, or has the way the modern world consumes information kind of permanently altered the relationship between institutions and the public?
Yeah, this gets tricky. I do think that um, individuals, if we just stick to health and not other areas, the individuals who are clinicians or biomedical scientists need to be need to really up their game in their individual interactions with, let's say, people in the clinic or people at school, parent meetings or church or whatever, to be more engaged and um, but because people do, as you said, they tend to trust individuals that they know. I mean, the polling is very clear that Americans, for example, don't trust medical institutions, but they trust their doctors and pharmacists and
Yeah.
nurses. Um, but I don't think that's enough. This battle is happening at a level which an individual can't control on social media. And I think we've got to figure out a new strategy to use social media to um, help people deal effectively with the environment that we're in. And we haven't figured out how to do that yet. If you just look at the volume of social media that's negative about things that are proven to be effective in health, it's profound. And you can't overcome that by one clinic visit every 6 months for someone who's seeing that
Mm.
24/7. So we need a competing, effective, I call it advertising truth system. And advertising truth includes, as I keep insisting, also advertising the uncertainty that's built into what the best recommendations are for health.
Mm. Um, I can edit this bit out. I've got a topic I can skip, and I have some hopefully quick fire questions. Are we good to
Sure.
do a couple of those?
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you. So, one question is if you could preserve one principle inside the FDA for the next 50 years, regardless of how technology changes, what would it be?
Evidence-based policy, not policy-based evidence. We've gravitated in this administration to a system where the politicians come to a conclusion and then they dispatch the scientists to bring back the evidence to support it. That's what trial lawyers do, but it's not the way to make health policy. And it's long in the tradition of FDA to get the evidence. That's what has made the FDA the standard for the world.
What do you hope that the younger professionals inside the FDA protect and carry forward from the generation of FDA leadership they've just had?
Um, my hope is that they will be devoted to helping the industry and the public develop the evidence that's needed to know the benefits and risks of the products that are being developed and marketed. And then in the post-market phase, increasingly will play a role in sorting out what happens in the real world.
When history looks back at this current period in healthcare, what do you think it will say?
When history looks back at the current period in healthcare, not specifically the FDA, it will say that we got caught in a transition that we were not prepared for, and that we had to evolve after some period of disruption. As you may know, I've used the analogy of Humpty Dumpty. I think we're going to have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again,
Mhm.
but we don't want to put Humpty Dumpty back together the way he was. And we definitely, in my view, don't want it the way it is now. We need to move to a different view of how the pieces come together in this new era of information overload.
And lastly, what are we at the greatest risk of forgetting right now?
I think, oh boy, that's a great question.
Best till last.
I I think the greatest risk is that um, we're at risk of not remembering that the best way to do well in life is to prepare for what may happen in the future and to invest in that preparation. So the biggest risk to humanity is going to come from pandemics, nuclear war, drone attacks, um, and common chronic disease. And if we don't prepare for those things, the damage will be far greater. So investing in that preparation is a really important element that I think is being forgotten right now.
And on that very highly positive note, Dr. Califf, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
You bet. Take care.
Take care.